So when we were thinking about what to offer and why anyone would want to come, these are the thoughts that came to me that I tried to design around. That there might be people here that are, trying to select education for themselves personally, and they want to get value for the money and time they're investing. Or perhaps you're a training designer who wants to polish your skills and see what works or fails from the student perspective. Or perhaps you're a manager that has to, pay for all this training people are requesting. And, all of the ISO standards have a requirement for competency. And there's been some debate about what that means, really. And there could be other reasons, but this is where, if you haven't already, you can put in the chat which perspective you have, or what is bringing you to today's webinar. So hopefully after the webinar you should be able to recognize some common mistakes in training and be able to look at learning objectives and distinguish ones that are good from poor, and be able to identify the 6 levels of Bloom's Taxonomy, and recognize when the content of the training and the assessments align to complement those learning objectives, that it's actually a full package for the student. And by having this background, it would enable you to look at different training options, or actually different development options, and make good choices. And I don't know if you've ever been whitewater rafting, but it's very intense. And West Virginia has some absolutely fabulous whitewater raft experiences at the New River. But one of the things about it is that you have to be able to do what needs to be done in the moment, or else you either going to get thrown from the boat or crash into rocks, or that may happen to one of your colleagues in the raft with you. And so I think about businesses and every day what they are facing, right? It's almost like this battle to make sure that your services and products meet all the requirements. You can make a profit, and people can feel good when they leave the day. And so rather than thinking about like just training as a thing, I want you to really think about the real intent for training is so that people can do what they need to do to be able to really function well in their work. And so I've broken it out into 6 different sections where we'll look at some common mistakes right off the bat, identify what a learning objective is so you can recognize that, then the Bloom's Taxonomy, what it is, and then how it's been expanded since the original work, some next steps for you, and then a list of resources that hopefully would be helpful to you after this webinar. So I think of people having one of my good friends had this master spreadsheet that really talked about the required training and who all needed it and how much, and like this whole budget of just how fast this budget grew, right, in order to meet all these different needs. And so we want to make sure that we're getting value out of each of those dollars. So mistake 1 is thinking that training is the answer to every problem. Now, some of you probably have seen that people think training is the answer to every nonconformity, and I don't agree with that either. Training has its purpose, but it's not the solution for everything. So with one example, a client was having real problems with their scrap rate. I mean, this was going on, and even once they were going 100% sort, and unbelievably, somebody shipped a batch of 100% scrap product to the customer. Oh my gosh! So this was spiraling quite a bit. Now they were throwing money at classroom training, hands-on, looking at metrics, trying to advertise the problems to get people to raise awareness and, reduce this scrap level. Well, when they just weren't making progress. Now, when I looked a bit farther into their pay scale, and I realized that they were paying workers for the number of parts they produced, not how many good parts they produced, which means really they were punishing good behavior and rewarding bad behavior by the incentive program. And so you want to look at what the problem is. Are there other issues that really need to be fixed, like incentives? There may be some things that the person is physically not able to do that fit for work, or perhaps they don't understand through language or education deficiencies. Mistake number 2 is that just because you've attended something means that you're competent, and I see this all the time. They have training records. They have, a lot of training records, but the competency piece is missing. In this one case, people, entering the room for training, they're signing the form, which I thought was an attendance log. And then lo and behold, as I read the top of the form, I see that it says, signing below confirms this training met my training needs. Now you have to understand, they're asking people to sign this before the training ever happens. This is what I call like pencil whipping, right? They're trying to get a record for the auditor or for some other purpose, but it's really not getting the facts from the people. And you ask people to sign something like this, they're like, yeah, they don't really want to know if it met my needs. They're just asking me to sign here. The third mistake is just fire hosing too much information in the time, giving information you don't need. People come away with not being able to really absorb and use this information because of that overwhelm. And then mistake 4 is when you have misaligned assessments. Now, hopefully none of you are guilty of this, but I'm willing to bet that at least some of you are. And again, you're welcome to make a comment in the chat. But it's pretty often that you'll see training be done and then a very simple quiz that's done afterward. And sometimes the quizzes are so obvious, like every time all of the above is offered, that's the correct answer. Or there are really jokes of answers in there with the correct one so that the correct one sticks out. It's not necessarily measuring comprehension or being able to use the information, but it means they could memorize it for a few minutes until after they finish that quiz. And so in one client, every month they did their safety meetings and they did that quiz, that easy quiz, and every month everyone passed. And so I do stir up trouble sometimes, and I ask for a pre-test. Like, I want to know what you already know and see if there's anything that's misunderstood. But I have rarely seen the kind of revolt that went on in the place because they wanted to, get that 100% pass from that easy quiz. And so we happen to be working on emergency response, and so I made on this pre-test set of questions that said, if you noticed an emergency, what would you do? And maybe there was other on there. I don't really remember. But if you think about these options, the correct answer I was hoping for, right, was C, call an inside emergency line. because if you call 911, you may have the emergency people show up, and your own people don't know that there's emergency responders on their way. They might not have anybody there to meet them or whatever, right? And this company had an inside emergency line. Well, to my shock and amazement, the most common answer, almost a majority, actually it was a majority of the answers, was B, run to the guard shack. It's like, really? Why? Well, they said, well, a few years ago they took out all the phone lines in the factory as a part of a cost-saving measure, and we're not allowed to have cell phones on the factory floor. So the only thing I can do, I don't think I could yell out enough to really get help, so I would run to the guard shack. Well, then we learned something that we needed to know, right, from this. So sometimes you'll have assessments that are way too easy, way too complicated, and what we really want to do is verify the people that we've trained can do what they need to do. So where's that gap from not competent to competent? In order to address this, you really need to understand who the learners are and what they already know and what else they need in order to work. And if we could possibly leverage that knowledge and skills, that can help them meet our goals by helping them improve their day-to-day performance. So now let's move into what is a learning objective. And this describes what the student needs to be able to do or should be able to do after the training. And you may have heard the term SWABAT. So I've got the bat there for you to help remind. And it really is, student will be able to. And here's some examples, some poor ones and some better ones. And if we start with the first row, it's really, really common to see understand or learn in a description of a training event. And it's pretty vague. What do we really mean by that? Well, I may be able to define or identify or demonstrate, but these words on the right-hand side are more specific as far as what I could do or what I'm expected to do. That would then demonstrate I understand or comprehend. Okay? And the learning objective, it's poor to say appreciate the usefulness of a circuit, whereas it's better if you talk about describing the 4 benefits of a circuit, right? And then the SWABAT, the students will be able to understand the significance of World War II. Well, we already criticized the word understand, whereas on the better side, it says we're going to be able to describe key milestones and economic impacts of World War II. So not social, not, how much military money was spent, it's more specific to give you an idea of what we're going to cover. So then here's a little bit more about that. The first example, be given opportunities to learn effective communication skills. Well, I don't know whether in your opinion you're thinking this is good or moderate or wonderful, but it's actually not a student outcome. It describes what we're going to cover in the program. So number 2, have a deeper appreciation for good communication practices. Well, I might, but again, I'm not really sure whether we're talking about communication during a date or parent-child or at work or what kind of communication. Doesn't have an action verb, doesn't really give us the context or the level of the learning. and again, the context, what type of communication are we talking about? So 3, we've got that dangerous word, understand again. It's a little less vague, but it's still too vague to do a formal assessment on. I'm going to see if I can mute. Sorry, I got a little bit of a cough. So this 4th one, now we understand that we're talking about communicating in a professional environment and through technical reports and presentations. We're not talking about dating or parent-child, and so this is specific. So now let's move into, now that you know what learning objectives are, let's go into, sorry, let me go back, into Bloom's Taxonomy. So Bloom, back in 1956, organized learning objectives into 3 competency levels of awareness, having a working knowledge of something, or being an expert. And you might be familiar with that term, subject matter expert. Now, within each competency level, Bloom defined 2 categories. And starting at the bottom, it's the least amount, and moving to the top the most. So you may have knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, evaluate, and create. So this next slide shows you a little bit more about what those words mean, right? And so the arrow on the left shows that the bottom is the lower order thinking skills, and as you go up the pyramid, you're getting into higher order thinking skills. And you move through these phases, right? I can just recall facts that you've given me. I can grasp the meeting by, understanding what you've presented. The 3rd level is applying in a similar situation, analyzing, taking the known apart and sorting out relationships. Evaluating is where you're making judgments, and creating is when you're really doing something new. Now, if you do any Googling or researching on this, you'll often hear the term Bloom's revised taxonomy. And so I know some of the folks attending may be interested to know, what it was. So 1956, the top was evaluation, and the next down was synthesis. And in 2001, they reversed those to be consistent with what I've just presented, where creating is the top and evaluating is next to the top. So, okay, so now we've talked a little bit about learning objectives, which leads you into training design, the what do I want my students to be able to do, and then how will I know that they can actually do it? That is the handshake between the design and the assessment. And something without assessment, you're just left hanging. That's like just having the training certificate, right? Now, yeah, and whether people sleep through it or whatever, they're still getting that same certificate in many cases, unfortunately. So if we take an example using apples and our knowledge of apples, this would show you how the assessment might step up as we step up the level in Bloom's taxonomy. So with the remembering, they should be able to tell us 3 common varieties of apple. The understanding would be able to identify the differences in characteristics between Golden Delicious and Granny Smith. They're both green, but there may be some other characteristics. Applying might be looking at what is in an apple and recognizing scurvy is missing vitamin C. You know, can we apply the information we know about apples to know whether eating apples would help us avoid scurvy because it contains vitamin C? Analyzing, this would be comparing and contrasting 4 ways of serving food made with apples and be able to examine which ones with the highest health benefits. Evaluating would be, again, some apples are really good for baking a pie and others not, not so much. So this would be being able to select the best apples specifically for a pie. And then creating would be converting an unhealthy recipe for a pie to a healthy recipe by replacing ingredients. And then be able to argue as to why the ingredients you substituted are better than the original ones. Okay. Now, an example here at this highest level of creating, some of you may be familiar with the Apollo 13 challenge, where the astronauts were on their way to walk on the moon, and unfortunately when they stirred the oxygen tanks, it's a routine practice that they did, they had an explosion. And in order to survive, they had to figure out how to keep the carbon dioxide from killing them. And so in the movie Apollo 13, you see the gentlemen who are breaking the news that they've overcome a bunch of different obstacles, but now the carbon dioxide may in fact kill the astronauts. And they have a square carbon dioxide filter in one part of the spacecraft and a circular filter in the opposite, like one was in the lunar module and the other was in the spacecraft. And so they said, we've got to figure out a way to get the air from one to the other, right? And all they have is a bunch of stuff that the astronauts have access to, and they have to create some way to be able to get the air filtered. And so they ended up creating this encapsulated box with a tube that's going to be able to go into the round holder. So this is where there's no book that you can go and look up. A friend of mine is he's a mechanical engineer, and the company he works for makes the stages for major entertainment acts. And he said there's just no book for this. They say they want to come in and they want to do this, and they want to come there, and they want to fly down from there, and they have to make up what they're going to create for these stars that's going to be safe to operate and still meet the wow factor that they're going for. Okay. So Bloom's taxonomy is, again, about comprehension and the different levels. And so over time, people have decided there's maybe some other factors that roll in and are important as well. So at a conference, there was a gentleman representing a hospital, and he's sharing about their quality journey. And he said, we started our journey when patient satisfaction was 15%. Now, there were a few thousand people in the audience, and I think we all gasped at that. Like, you have to make an awful lot of people mad to be at 15%. And then he said, well, when we got serious about improving is when it fell to 8%. And there really was a gasp of all, again, thousands of people. We all gasped at the same time. Like, are you really kidding? Now, you can imagine that they had been spending money on training and talking about, patient satisfaction and doing all kinds of work about this. And then they had their epiphany and said, oh my, perhaps they're not going to treat the patients any better than they feel treated at work. And so when they got that epiphany, they started to ask about, the whole the staff culture. And of course there was, bile that was like all these things that were wrong with the hospital. But they took this on and apologized and really did a lot of wonderful work. They ended up winning the National Baldrige Award. Their customer satisfaction is just incredible. They are the provider of choice in a wide regional range now. But the point about this example is that you can have the knowledge, but that doesn't mean you're going to do it. And so the Blooms takes care of the cognitive part of learning. And then you have the emotion or the affective domain, which is about your desire to do things. Again, that feeling valued, wanting to make the patients feel valued. And then the psychomotor or the action domain, this is when you really need to physically manipulate something. Can you use the tools? Are you able to physically do the work? Because that's another domain. So the traditional question is what do learners need to know? But it's been revised to say, what do they need to do? And why aren't they doing it? Like, what is the obstacle for that? Because it may be something other than knowledge that's being a block for them. So there's a book that's going to be in the reference section. It's called Map It from Kathy Moore. And she's really very passionate about, don't just jump on training as the first, thing you're going to do to try to improve things. But really think about the problem that you're trying to solve in how things are done. And then think about, several different factors. And she's got a little flow chart here that says, is training going to help solve this problem? Because there's several other options that might be more effective than training. And then if training turns out to be appropriate, right, then really be a show, not tell. It's where they make a decision and they see the consequence of this. And so this number 4 talks about, a lot of training is blah, 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 blah quiz, right? And we've already talked about these obvious quizzes, these things that are more pencil whipping, whereas we really want to think about information, apply it, see how things, what are the challenges they're likely to face, and then, can they pull together to solve that problem? And if not, what did they learn from that so they can do it better next time around? You're probably familiar with this already, that if you are only reading something, you get about 10% of it. If you hear it, 20. If you see it, 30. If you both see and hear, you might get 50%. If you actually discuss it, right, we're having a conversation about it, you can get as high as 70. And if you have an experience, it's 80%. And then if you can teach it to others, it can be up to 95%. And so in some of the auditing courses, we try to make it an experience of an audit. Yeah, you don't have enough time. Yeah, people are, you know, the interviews are happening. You have information that you received at the beginning of the day or earlier in the week or in the newsletter, and you have to pull these pieces together in order to make your judgment here on a later day. And they're like, oh, you expected me to remember that. Yeah, that's what auditing is. Not just like ticking the box and going down a checklist that is like pencil whipping, right? So when they get that experience, they're like, ah, so I need to go into it thinking this and this and this. It's very powerful. Okay, so I have another example for you, and for those of you, I'll put that YouTube link in the chat for you, if I can. Well, it's on the slide. But the example about this is only a 1.5-minute video, but we did our try run yesterday and couldn't get the sound to work with this platform. So we have some snapshots instead. So in the beginning, it talks about you're going to need courage, calm, and a fire extinguisher, right? And so maybe in the chat you can say, do you know how to use a fire extinguisher, yes or no, or if you had training. So then it talks about the different types of fire extinguishers, the A, B, and C, and which ones we need for home. Actually showed us some of the instructions on the side of the fire extinguisher. Mentions you might want to look at the pressure as well, because if it's empty, it's not going to work. And then it went into the idea of deciding if you're going to flee or fight the fire. And after watching a few times, I thought, oh, that's probably why they talked about courage and calm at the beginning, but it kind of got dropped in here in the middle. So it seemed a little out of context for me. Then it talks about pass. Now, pass is the normal thing that's emphasized in fire extinguisher training. It's point, aim, squeeze, and sweep. But they don't really ever spell that out in the video. So then they have somehow these steps, the step 5, and the caption they have on it is pull the pin. But what are they doing in the video? They're squeezing. And then here it says pull the pin or ring that unlocks the fire. The caption is staying even though the picture has moved on. And what is he demonstrating? The squeeze and the sweep. So the instructions on the caption and the video are misaligned. And we talk about how far away you should be. And then we get the squeeze to discharge, which is, again, the same thing over here with a different caption. So with this, it just struck me that if I was really trying to learn how to use a fire extinguisher, I wasn't quite sure I would be proficient in this. And if you take the time to watch the video, I have a survey where you can give me your feedback, because maybe I'm just you know, too critical, but sometimes it helps to see an example where, you know, from the learner point of view, it's not as smooth as the people who are making the video, right? Because making a video can be tedious and time consuming. But I just went through and looked at, you know, the different subjects as I could remember them, and whether we need all this information, you know, or not, or does it flow? Is it helpful? It would be nice to spell this out if you're wanting people to remember that. In a 1.5-minute video, we don't hear about this until 1 minute in. And then they do demonstrate each part of the PATH acronym, but it's really quick, and the captions don't necessarily match the visual of it. And instead of being step 1, 2, 3, 4, because it comes so late in the video, it's 4 through 6. Okay, so you can, if you want to play, you're welcome to do this. Now, it doesn't really say what type of fire, but because they have the, see if I go back, because they have the house, assuming that this is intended for people that are at home. But if you're talking about your factory, there's someone who's doing the checks every month to be sure it's filled and no cracks and all that stuff. You just need to know where the closest one is for you and do that. Okay. Okay, so go through that. I was just trying to answer a question I saw pop up. So this is the cover of the book, Map It, by Kathy Moore. And it's about, you know, how this is a great training designer work. And so she said the first thing is to take the hat off that says you're a course producer. You want to be a problem solver. You want to understand what is the problem, and then, you know, do some background about the client and about the problem. And when you're kicking things off, you want to keep the focus on the problem, because people will go, well, we just need a course. With one client where they had new salespeople, they had an awful lot of different parts, and people would call and they wouldn't know what part number they needed, and they would try to describe it to these new people, and they were making errors, right? Well, what they decided, they needed a placemat with pictures of the parts and what they're used for, so that they could then enable the people on the phone with the customer to ask the questions to help narrow down, like, what is it that you actually need? And that really helped reduce the problems that they were having with this. But it wasn't training, it was more the job aid. Okay. So then, again, just following up with Kathy's approach of defining that goal that we want for business improvement and focus on what people need to do, and then help them solve the problems. Don't train around them, like go at it straight on, and provide experiences where they can try to do what they need to do and not just be a fire hose of information that they aren't going to be able to apply in a real life situation. And the whole idea that training doesn't need to be an event, it could be the mentoring, it could be a series of interactions that help build the knowledge. Okay, so next steps. We want you not to just know about Bloom's Taxonomy, but we'd like you to be able to apply this so that you can get more value out of all the money that you're spending to help develop your folks and yourself. So first thing is just making sure that you're clear. There's a whole range of learning outcomes to being aware of something versus being able to do more complex evaluation and creating new things. That Bloom and others, they categorize learning into the 3 domains: the knowledge piece, which is cognitive, the emotional piece, which is affective, and the physical piece, which is psychomotor. And that good training design includes more than training, more than just information. And then if you're doing training without an assessment that actually aligns with your expectations, you're probably not getting the value of the money spent. My daughter was applying for a job that was going to be an executive assistant to someone at a university, and part of that job was being able to, you know, manage work and prioritize and some of those things that are kind of difficult to assess. But I thought it was extremely clever that they had her come in, gave her computer, gave her a list of 90 tasks. Some were PowerPoint, some Excel, some Word, some other types of things, and they said complete as many correctly as possible, and we'll see in an hour. And so she started working the list, and then she said, hey, they didn't say do them in order. They said do them so that the maximum number were done correctly. And so then she started prioritizing the list. Oh, I'm faster at this than that. I'm more, proficient in this and that. And so they were testing her ability to do that prioritization and also checking her accuracy with that same, assessment. I think by now just attending something doesn't mean you're competent to do the work. And their focus is really on changing performance on the job, not just getting knowledge in their head. And that this training and development should help solve your business problems as well, because they're going to be better performers. So what should you do next? So if you've got events that are just telling, like you might want to just stop for a moment and say, is there a way that we could focus on doing or give practice to people so that, again, maybe they only need awareness. Maybe they just need to be, have a working knowledge of this, or maybe they need to be a subject matter expert, right? And really think about what a valid assessment might look like. And ask yourself if training is the answer, or what else might be better for the learners. And you could look at existing training and try to evaluate what level of Bloom's Taxonomy is it trying to reach for the students. Is that what we need, or is it more than we need or less than we need? Because maybe a slight change could be appropriate to be more effective for you. Okay? And then you could select formats that can assess the progress of the learner, right? To confirm that they've got it and they can do what they need to do. And that's going to give you the most value for your money. So the last section is the resources, where hopefully this is just wet your whistle and you're like, I want to know more. I want to actually use this. So we've got the list of all the individual slides have a reference, but they're compiled here for you. Kathy Moore has quite a few free resources on her website. What I especially liked is that she walks the talk. She has some example ways of showing versus telling. She has some where you can give your answer and then click a button and see what she recommends as an answer to see whether you were, on point or, oh, I have more to learn about this. And then tophat.com has a professor's guide, which contains a lot of really nice information. All they ask is that you give them your email address, and there's no fee for it. And then here's my email where you can request the slides and then the handouts. So what's in the handouts? Well, I want to give a shout out to J.D. Marhevko, who is extremely active in the ASQ Quality Management Division. She helped provide some initial information from ASQ's body of knowledge that relates to Blooms, and kind of just said, yeah, you can really do this. So this is one page of a multi-page list that kind of combines, where she consolidated definitions, some verbs, some question stems, some potential activities and products from the, like a part of the assessment, right? And some examples and testing. This I saw on LinkedIn. The most I could, I have a source there. It took a while to get that down. I'm not sure they're the original source, but with the Malcolm Baldrige program, you hear turn data into information that's actionable. And so for that analyze part of Bloom's taxonomy, I thought this was a good example where you have all the data, right? And then you start to sort it or arrange it, and then you may have this like a reverse Pareto chart here. But then you want to have a story that comes from that. Yeah, so can go on. And then Kathy Morgan has a checklist. This is one page shown out of a multi-page checklist, where if you're trying to evaluate your existing training, you can kind of evaluate, is it an information dump or is it action-oriented materials? And you can kind of see whether this is meeting your needs or what part of it might need to be enhanced to be more effective. From the Top Hat guide, this is just a little worksheet as you're planning your lecture, planning your training. What's that beginning, middle, and end? What type of assessment might be appropriate to just, check in, be sure people are on board, and then tick the box kind of thing, again, to remind you of different choices you might have. They also, in the same handout from Top Hat, they show the type of assessment and then the level of Bloom's taxonomy and what type of assessment aligns with expectations from the levels. And then from Top Hat again, similar to what JD put together, a different format. And then one last example of poorly written learning objectives and better written ones, just to help you become comfortable with recognizing when things are well done. And then because I kind of like to touch things, right, I also found these two so that when I'm working and what level am I working at, I can flip and see some of those same trigger memory joggers for the words that are appropriate, and I can decide if I'm in the right ballpark or I need to move up or down on that. And this is similar, except it's a wheel. So if you like those kinds of tools, there's two references there on Amazon. And so again, in the middle of the slide, it shows my email address, so just drop me a line if you want a copy of the slides in PDF form and the handout. I personally love to do customized learning design, especially for internal auditors that are going to be working on any of the ISO standards. And then I have other free resources on my website. And with that, Shobha, I'll turn it back to you to see if we have any questions that have come in.
Thank you, Diana. That was a really informative presentation. Yeah, we'll take up a question that we have. How do you design the training if there's a variety of skills problems in the audience?
Well, the question is, do they need to all be together as one experience? Are we trying to bring people along? Or when sometimes that's appropriate because you can use some of the more experienced people to be with, right, the learners, like the people who are really introductory into this. So you run the risk of them being the boss of people because like they know it all. But even in some classes, I put all the more skilled people in the same team and moderately skilled people in their own team and the brand new people in their own team so that they can learn at their own pace, right? And they can see how, the learning is progressing in the group. But there's not a single way of doing it, but there's different approaches depending on the subject matter and the desired outcome of the time spent together.
So the next question, I'm going to take 2 more questions in the interest of time, and then the other questions can be sent to you directly. So the next question is that sometimes it's not possible to know the skills and problems ahead of time.
Yeah, I know, but we have to ask.
Okay. And the next one is, how do you design effective training that will only take 30 to 60 minutes? Covering content, activity, and assessment is a lot.
So one of the most memorable events in my life was through my volunteer work, and I was learning how to run a tournament for the competitions for the kids, right? So to give you an idea, we would have about 220 volunteers for the day, take over an entire school. Is a pretty big deal, right? And so how do I not be overwhelmed by it? Well, our very first few minutes of the course, we opened an envelope and out came, I don't know, 150 things, right? And they said, so before the tournament ends, you're going to have to do all these things. So figure it out. Like, what can you do? Like, now it's September and the tournament's going to be March. So figure out your months, and then like what might you be able to do in the timeline. Well, in that bit of time, we learned everything there was about doing a tournament, but it was interactive. It was like, I don't really know when that's going to happen. Well, we're going to put a pile like that. Oh, well, the schedule, that's going to happen, later. But I've used that same approach in lead auditor training, where I have all the tasks they need to do, and I also put in, like phone home, sleep, eat, the kinds of things in there. And they really get engaged that very first minute, and they've talked about all the tasks they need to do. They've asked questions. And as an alternative, in a telling mode, it's hours of time, and they may not really get the impact of all these things they need to do. So if you can think of some interactive way that you're challenging the people, you can get a lot more learning, even if you're only limited to an hour.